You're listening to the Bear in Mind Podcast, episode 112.
A podcast uncovering identity, color, and love, where driving yourself crazy is totally sane and curable. Now your host, T. Bias.
Today we're talking about why those time management tips, all of those lovely tips out there, why they don't work. And I shared with you 3 tips to get started during the holidays. And if you have a New Year's resolution, get started with those tips. I talked about it in the previous episode, 111. And I wanted to check back with you and see how the week went by doing one of those tips. And I'm going to recap what the tip was one is have an end time to an activity. Any activity. It can be going to somebody's house or it can be an activity you're doing at home. 2 is plan one activity each day. And 3 is plan in your rest time where it's your free time. So I'm going to split this up into 2 categories. One is if you didn't do the tip after you heard it, or if you heard another tip, or you read it in an article or another podcast, and you didn't do that tip that you wanted to do. And then I'm going to talk about if you did one of those tips, and then why that maybe won't work in the long run, like why maybe you won't continue it in the long run. And so first, if you didn't do any of the tips, one is you totally have a normal brain. It's because the brain doesn't want to change. And you already know that. And I think a lot of us get that. The brain automatically resists change. What this episode is going to do is how your brain is resisting that change, because it's very subtle. And each of us has our own objections to the change. So if you didn't do any of them, it's probably going to fall into one of these kind of categories. And one is when you heard the tips, is you've probably heard these tips before. Maybe you did it like for a little bit and it didn't work or something. And so you come already with this existing objection. We call it bias. And it's based on maybe our past experience. Oh, I already did that tip, to plan in my rest time. I get it, but I don't have time. All of that stuff that your brain comes up with, it's the way it's going to resist change. There's nothing actually wrong with the tips, right? Because then what do? We try to find other kinds of tips. Maybe, I haven't heard of this tip, or the new and improved tips for this year. And here's what really works. And really, when you look at all the tips around time management, they're all very similar. And they're there because they do work. They do work with your brain. It's in the beginning. Your brain is working against them. And so you have some bias, some previous objection that you have decided. So your brain doesn't want to change. And you've already decided that that's the truth. I've already tried this one thing. I've already tried to plan in my rest time. It's too much. And that's not a fact. It's not a fact that it's too much or you don't have time. That's an opinion that your brain is offering you. That's the objection your brain is offering you to keep itself in status quo, because status quo right now looks really good to your brain. So that's what the objections look like. That's what the bias looks like. I've done it before. I've tried this before. It's not this won't work. Even if you don't have past evidence of it won't working, you've decided it won't work because this situation, it's not going to work in this situation. That's just the fancy way of your brain trying to get you to not change. It sounds really truthful, doesn't it, in your head? And it's not a fact, because we can't prove it in a court of law. And there's millions of examples of people having a lot of stuff to do, quote unquote, a lot of stuff to do, because that's really an opinion, and they have rest time. And I thought I was one of them, and then now I plan in my rest time. And there's so many examples in this world of super successful people that earn a lot of money that have rest time. And so before you try any other sort of new tip or another tip or go back and search, it's those objections that you need to work through. You need to come to a point where you can recognize that that's an opinion your brain is offering you, and it's not based on any fact. not based on any universal truth, even for you. And here, when we're looking at an objection where we have kind of this already objection that in our situation, these tips are not going to work. And it's usually centered around, well, my situation, there's so much to do, or my situation is different. Notice we're using a lot of vague terms, different, we have so much. All of those adjectives, they're different for each person. And there's something that I work with on my clients is looking at things from a factual perspective rather than a so much or my situation's different, is we basically solve a math problem. We actually look at objectively and factually what are the things that we are doing and then trying to get more intentional about it. And so now I'm going to talk about the second thing is that we try a tip, and this goes back to the first objection too, but maybe you've tried this tip and you have recent evidence, okay, this didn't work. Like it really didn't work for me. And it's slightly different than the other objection where you've kind of already decided and you don't do it. But here you've actually tried it and you have this kind of recent thing. No, I actually went about it and I did it. And what you maybe had an expectation of the tip is to maybe feel a certain way or to have all of a sudden more hours a day or feel like you have more hours a day, which is a feeling. And that's the result that you didn't get. And whenever we start a new tip, we have this idea, and it's totally normal, that all of a sudden our week is going to be amazing. We do this one tip and something is instantly going to change. And it's very much about instant gratification, which is what our brains want. We want instant gratification. And it doesn't happen. And usually that's what happens with a lot of tips and anything we try to incorporate into our lives. The first time we try something, it doesn't work. That first week or that first couple of weeks we're on a diet, it doesn't work. We didn't lose the kilo that we wanted. We're like, wait a minute, this didn't work. Wait a minute, I don't all of a sudden have this amazing amount of time left over. And so the objection that we need to quote unquote get over is that instant gratification, that need, that survival need for that instant gratification. And when we do something, and if you did one of the tips that I talked about in last week's episode, what you can do is to say, okay, maybe the expectation of or understand what your result is. What is it that you want? And look at what is it your goal when you want to manage your time. Is it to have that free time? Is it to reduce your stress? Like what are the things that you're wanting to achieve about your time management? Because that is so much more revealing. If you did the tip and you didn't get a result that you wanted from following a tip, great. That tells you what you want out of this time management. And then you can look at how you executed that tip and you can find out what didn't work. Because no time management tip is going to work instantly. When I first started this, I was like, oh my God, this is not working. It's like, this is really not working. And then my life coach helped me see the learnings from doing something for 1 week and then changing it in the next week and then learning from that week and then changing it into finally where I have more of a consistent process, more of a habit that is more ingrained in my head where it's coming from this kind of automatic place. Right now, it's not very automatic because it's new to your brain. And the third thing that I wanted to talk about, and I said I was going to split this into two areas, and I realized that as I was speaking, there's actually kind of this third element, is that we're sort of resisting something in this time management. It's a little bit digging deeper into why we are resisting maybe things like what would happen if we had some free time? What would come up for us? What would our emotions reveal about ourselves? What would our life reveal about ourselves if all of a sudden we had this space? Sometimes there's a resistance when we actually want something. Like when I wanted to manage my time and not feel stressed and not feel busy, I resisted it because there was some advantage to being busy all the time. It kept me away from really looking deeper into my relationships, kind of the thoughts I was having about my relationships, and digging deeper a little bit into my frustration and anger. It opened up some of those emotions. So there is some of that resistance to even having something that we want it so badly. We want to maybe lose the weight or manage our time so well, but there's this little part of us that wants to stay in the status quo because the status quo is not so bad. It keeps us from maybe going into a more not necessarily more uncomfortable, but more unfamiliar territory that we've never explored before. And that newness, that fear that comes up from going there is one of the reasons, even though we're just talking about time management, it is often revealed when you work on your time management. Oh, if all of a sudden I had free time, what would that tell me about myself? Maybe I would have thoughts that I don't like myself so much. And that's kind of where we tend to resist it. We're actually deep down resisting this change that we so badly want. So that's all I have for you this week. I'll check back with you next.
Thanks for listening. Listen for a new episode next Tuesday by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Bye for now.